Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pro Soccer Talk. I'm your host, Joe Prince-Wright, over here in England. As you can see, I'm joined by Nick Mendola in Buffalo, New York, and Andy Edwards in Kansas City. Lads, pleasure as always to join you. First and foremost, the Premier League once again was pretty wild over the weekend. I'm going to games over here, lucky enough to be able to do that in these behind closed-door stadiums. So I was at Southampton against Manchester United to see that incredible comeback from the Red Devils. Edinson Cavani jumping off the bench and scoring late. So that was my highlight, I guess you could say. It was pretty wonderful to see our Matador ripping it up in the Premier League finally. What did you enjoy about the weekend, Nick? Because there was a lot of good performances out there, weren't there?
There were a lot of good performances, but frankly, I just would like to blame Chris Wilder for all the bad ones. That's all I want to do.
Okay, so you're going to take a leaf out of Jurgen Klopp's book there. That's fair. That's fair enough. It seems like the cool thing to do right now. Blame Chris Wilder for pretty much everything. Andy, you on the Chris Wilder blame game wagon?
No, I'll give him a free pass, but that was well played, Nick. I think my highlight from the weekend, I think we might look back come a little bit later in the season and say this was the weekend the title race was back on again. City absolutely pummeled Burnley. Liverpool dropping points, just 6 points between them now, a game in hand for City. It's not nearly as far as it was.
Very congested at the top of the table now. Few wins, few defeats for teams, and it seems to really have kind of Constantine it up early in the season, which is just the way we like it. Keep it interesting. Let's keep this title race going all season long. So if you're new to Pro Soccer Talk, we have a chat, transatlantic beer. So boys, great to chat as always. And let's focus on the analysis and get things kicked off this week. Focusing on three things we learned in the Premier League this week. And Nick, Andy, and I do that throughout the season. On every single Premier League game, we share our expert analysis on what we noticed, what was going on in and around these games. And yeah, it was interesting for me to be at St. Mary's to see Southampton go 2-0 up, undeservedly so. Did not play well at all in the first half against Man United, but somehow they led 2-0. I left my seat at halftime. I saw a backroom member of Southampton's staff and said, what do you think about that then? They said, I don't like the way this is heading. And they were spot on because Edinson Cavani came on. Took an age to put his boots on, changed his boots, took a bracelet off, was chatting around and, really taking his time. But when he did come on the pitch, he was brilliant and totally changed this game. I mean, our Matador, he's brilliant. Obviously, we know as the central striker, but he was just all over the place, brought a totally different energy to this team. And I want to share what I heard because when it was 2-1, United are already kind of turning the screw there. And Solskjaer, he gets a lot of stick, but he was trying to get Cavani's attention. He was shouting, Eddie, Eddie. And then in the end, he couldn't hear him, but he said to Nemanja Matic, tell Edinson to stay central. Stop going wide, stay central, and we'll get the ball to him. What did he do? He equalised by staying central, and then he did exactly the same in the 93rd minute to win it. So Cavani knows how to play as a central striker. Solskjaer was a great striker in his days, but that was really interesting for me to be that close, 10, 15 yards away from the United bench, and to hear those small kind of details during a game. That really changes things, I think. It kind of, Cavani may have known that, but just hearing that from the sidelines could have changed his mind on how to get in those gaps and inside the Southampton defence. So for me, I learned that Cavani is a genius in the box, and Solskjaer still is as well and hasn't lost that knack, even though he hasn't played for a long time. So that's what I learned this weekend. Nick Mendola, what did you learn?
Yeah, perfect timing from Ole because Cavani's assist came from wide. So you had that going for him. I want to piggyback on your Cavani point because Solskjaer talked about Sir Alex saying that space in the box was a striker's best friend. Pep Guardiola said after City beat Olympiacos 1-0 but had a ton of chances that City would break everything eventually when they put it all together. And I think that might have been a language thing, but 5-0 over Burnley later, wow. And I want you to think about as we imagine this team with Sergio Aguero back in it eventually, think about Mahrez's goals, as pretty as they were. Back post ×3, none too far from the 6-yard box, only one requiring some real dribble work. And there were 4 games this weekend in which expected goals difference was larger than City's 1.74. Brighton, Man United, Villa, and Leeds all were expected to win by more than City did. But City had that finish. So they didn't even manufacture as many chances as usual. So let's remember that as Sergio Aguero comes back. And as Andy mentioned, a game in hand away, if that's a win, from being 3 points off the top of the table for City.
Andy, what about you? What did you learn?
Big game Jose. He's back once again, taking those big games and just squeezing the life out of them for a clean sheet. Doesn't care if it's 0-0 at the end, just wants the result, isn't willing to give up the 3 points. It was a tactical battle, shall we say, at Stamford Bridge on the weekend, but it was interesting to see Mourinho and Lampard, student, master, go against one another and make those small adjustments in the game. And it seemed like Lampard got much the better of the second half with a couple of tactical adjustments, and Chelsea probably deserved 3 points from that game. Spurs didn't offer too terribly much of their own. But again, I think this is what we expect from Mourinho in these big games. He's going to go clean sheet above all else. He's not going to let you beat him. He doesn't care if he beats you. You will not beat him. And Spurs do just enough there to stay top of the table for another week.
And I did ask Jose Mourinho about Tottenham's title hopes after the game on Zoom. And I said, if you were a horse and characterizing yourself in this title race, what would you be? Because remember a few years ago when he said we're just a small horse when he was at Chelsea and trying to take the pressure off his team. And he told me, we're not even a horse. We're not even in the race. We're a pony. So Tottenham are now a pony in this title race, which is so typical for Mourinho to play down their chances, even though they're sitting pretty at the top and looking very good early in the season. So, yeah, Jose being Jose, right, Nick?
Cue Genuine. I mean, that could be their song. I would like to hear that. Also, Andy, you mentioned the caginess of it, and I'll bring back my numbers nerd. Barely over 1 combined expected goal in that game. Bring me Pulisic earlier. Come on, Christian, get healthy.
Bearded Pulisic as well.
Love it. I love the beard. Happy Thanksgiving. Very seasonal.
Absolutely. There was another point, guys, that obviously we learned this weekend, something that came to the fore, obviously the horrendous injury to Raul Jimenez, his head injury. The latest news on that, the update is that he's in hospital in London. He's had surgery on a fractured skull after that nasty, horrible collision with David Luiz, where he was knocked unconscious, was carried off the pitch, gained consciousness only when he got to hospital later on. Jimenez has released a statement. He's recovering and said I will be under observation and I hope to return to the pitch soon. But the big debate around this is David Luiz was allowed to carry on after that nasty clash of heads, cut his head, a really bad cut, had it bandaged back up. He came on and played the rest of the first half, but then came off at half time after passing the concussion protocols. That's what Arsenal say and the doctor on field said. But he came off at halftime due to the nasty gash. But obviously we'll have latest news on Jimenez and updates as it happens on Pro Soccer Talk, and we wish him a speedy recovery. The Mexican striker has been brilliant for Wolves in the Premier League over the last few years. But Andy, what did you make of that situation, especially I guess with David Luiz? There's a lot of talk about maybe a concussion sub or update in the concussion protocols in the Premier League.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one to try and cover all the points in situations like this, because at the end of the day, the only thing that anybody is caring about is about the well-being of the players on the field. And it is very difficult to immediately diagnose. There is no definitive test for concussion. And so it very much is in the medical professionals' hands. And so you have to trust them, but they have the motivation of, we need to win this game, and having to sub off your starting center back after 5 minutes puts you at a disadvantage to do that. So there's a lot of different motivations going on here. And so you just hope that, again, above all else and at all times, that player safety is the number one priority, and that they did do right by David Luiz, and that it was just a cut that was difficult to close up because it was very large on top of his forehead, right where his hairline starts, and there was no concussion. You hope, because those lingering effects, we've seen what they can do to some very, very great players around the world.
Nick, we hope with Jimenez that obviously he does make a full recovery, but it's going to be a long road back for him to recover from such a horrendous injury, isn't it?
Yeah, it's always stomach churning for me because people of our generation, guys, a bit older, we did not have the head, for lack of a better term, the knowledge and the wisdom of treating head injuries. In the 90s, when I was playing hockey and soccer in high school, it was you got your bell rung, and when you felt better, you went back in. And I can remember finally seeing a head specialist at one point after a particularly bad injury, and them telling me to take a year off. And I think it's really easy to remember. If anybody's been around footballers of either sport who played in the 70s and the 80s when head protection wasn't that good, a lot of them aren't in great shape. And so let's not forget that the brain is the nerve center of our bodies. And, you can have a fully functioning everything else and you're nothing without your brain. So when I saw Raul tweet, his statement that he'll be back on the pitch soon, my thought was, man, I hope so, one, but also I hope you take your time, because there are so many more important things than that.
And definitely with Jimenez, obviously he's a player so good in the air, uses that part of his body a lot to be so effective. So you really just hope that, he can recover, like you said, Nick, take his time and come back even better and even in a better position. So our best wishes go out to Raul Jimenez, and at Pro Soccer Talk and NBCSports.com, we'll keep you updated with his condition and all the statements from both him and Wolves as they come through. Gents, next big news topic I want to focus on is something that I think we should check in on throughout the season every month. And that's who is the player of the season right now? Who's the candidates? Who are the leading contenders? I think we have a clear leading contender early in the season. But let's start this conversation and then revisit it throughout the season. I'm going to go ahead and just say that we all agree that Harry Kane is the leading contender right now. I mean, through the first 10 games of the season, he has 7 goals, 9 assists in the Premier League. He's leading Tottenham's charge early in the campaign. What do we think, lads? I mean, Andy, I see you nodding your head. It looks like you agree with that.
Spurs have scored 21 goals in the Premier League this season. Harry Kane has contributed to 16 of them. That's 78%. We're done here.
Yeah.
All right. That was easy. Nick, are there some other players that there's a lot of players who got high production early in the season, a lot of goals, a lot of contenders. I'm looking at De Bruyne, Bruno Fernandes, Son. Who's really leading that pack with Kane for you?
So, 3 playmakers from 3 big teams with an outside shout to Jack Grealish, who I just don't think Villa's ever going to get the recognition in order to push him up there. And I do think big clubs tend to dominate this. Bruno Fernandes has been sensational. Kevin De Bruyne, I feel like I talk about him all the time. So I'm going to go in the other direction and talk about Mo Salah. I think he's wonderful. And I think because we are a contrarian society who likes to pick the dark horse, last year there was all this talk about Sadio Mane, who was absolutely terrific. But Salah is still just electrifying. He makes so many chances. He gets so many shots. He's an underrated playmaker in terms of passing. I think he is largely responsible for generating what's kept Liverpool in this discussion with all their defensive problems. So I look to Salah. And then I think, Joe, you might be able to point us in the direction of a couple of other Merseyside guys.
Yeah, I was in 2 minds about saying James Rodriguez, but I think even though his production hasn't been that high since the start of the season, it was, scoring goals and assisting galore when Everton were on top in the early weeks. But even though that's settled down a bit, he is still impacting games and he has just so much quality on the ball. And of course, Calvert-Lewin is benefiting a lot from that and scoring a lot of goals. So those 2 probably have to be in the conversation. Look around, you mentioned Grealish, obviously is leading Aston Villa, even though they've had a bit of a dip as well. Danny Ings has been great for Southampton, even Ward-Prowse, you have to say, has taken his game to a new level. And Wilfried Zaha, I mean, talk about a one-man team. Crystal Palace have missed him a lot since he's been out in recent weeks. So there are a lot of contenders there from teams who are just having good starts to the season, and now you want to see if they can continue that throughout the campaign, right, Andy?
Yeah, and I think another player that I would throw in there who came along a little bit slower to begin, but has really, really warmed up quickly is Diogo Jota from Liverpool as well. Maybe not going to quite get the chances with all the players around him to get into a player of the season conversation. But if you're talking about signing of the season as well, I think easily the way he slotted into that Liverpool team and just looked like one of the guys for the last 4 years, has picked up immediately with them, has been really impressive, and obviously a very astute piece of business from Liverpool there. So probably worth mentioning him, as he is the second leading scorer for the defending champions and the team that are level on points at the top of the table.
Definitely. And go ahead, Nick.
Oh no, I'm sorry, Joe. I was just going to say, because I never give this guy credit either. Jamie Vardy is delivering goals pretty much whenever he plays. I think he was leading the expected goals table as well, for me to bring that up one more time. And of course, everyone also considers Alan St. Maximin and John Joe Shelby in this discussion as well.
I thought we were going to get a shout for Steve Bruce there, Nick.
Listen,
You never give him credit.
Leader of men, a guy you want to have a pint with, an absolute magician of motivation. Tactics, however, leave something to be desired.
Wow.
You can't have it all.
I didn't think we'd be giving that much praise to Steve Bruce this early in the season, but there we go. That shows just how well they're doing. So this is a conversation we're going to be checking in on throughout the campaign. Be interesting to see you guys watching this in the comments below. Let us know who you think's been the player of the season so far. And we will be updating this. We'll, probably on a monthly basis, right, guys? After the busy festive period, we'll kind of look back on this and see how those players are doing. But the cream is definitely rising to the top. And those star names are like Bruno Fernandes, Harry Kane, De Bruyne, Salah, Son. They're leading the charge early in the season. And that's been great to see because the stars are definitely shining in the Premier League so far. So I'm now going to switch gears a little bit because from the Premier League to the US men's national team, they're playing again. They're squeezing in one more game in 2020. Obviously, big success in November with the draw at Wales and the win against Panama, which really kind of lifted optimism levels around the US men's national team fan base. And they have a game against El Salvador and Fort Lauderdale at Inter Miami Stadium on December the 9th, final friendly, and a chance for Greg Berhalter to see a totally different squad of players, because in Europe, they had all the European-based players, obviously, for the most part. But now this is all a squad of MLS-based players. And Nick, I know you've written a lot about this on Pro Soccer Talk with your analysis on what the lineup could look like. There's a lot of young players included, a lot of dual nationals that I'm looking at. You know, maybe they've learned a lesson from bringing Yunus Musa into the camp and trying to show him, like, this is what we're all about. This, if you play for the USA, this is what we can offer you. And maybe they're just trying to do that and steal a march on their rivals with a lot of these dual nationals they've called up for this camp, right? It seems like it's going to be really interesting to see what direction Berhalter takes this.
Yeah, I'm curious because this is the perfect time to do it. And I think you and I had spoken about this off camera, where the dual nationals, why wouldn't you invite them in a situation where you're not pressuring them to cap tie them, bring them into a camp, see how they rate, especially with 4 Mexican Americans. I remember, of course, there was so much hype with Gonzalez from Monterrey and how the U.S. didn't even really seem to go after him. So put in the effort, show them. I mean, listen, we're a rich country over here, for better or for worse, in some ways. And we know that the resources are there. We know the players are going to see something nice. So I like that. And the guys that we're looking at, I really like Frankie Amaya from FC Cincinnati, but Efrain Alvarez, Farfan from Portland, the Canadian Ayo Akinola from Toronto FC. These are guys who are potentially filling needs, especially Akinola, as we try to figure out who the number 9 is. And I know, Joe, that's been a big concern of yours. And remember, one other thing that's pretty important here is teams that get eliminated from the playoffs can also be added into this equation. They said that in the release. So along with the usual suspects of Jossie Zardes, Jordan Morez, you still could see a name like, hopefully, Andy, I'm wrong here, but Gianluca Busio, Henry Kessler, and Brian Reynolds, in half of FC Dallas. So the roster isn't even set, and I think there's a lot of intrigue here.
Andy, what do you think? Because it looks like Berhalter is casting the net as wide and as far as he possibly can. As I said, that example with Musa, trying to get these players in and almost having 2 squads with these friendlies, a chance to look at all the European-based players and now all the MLS-based players.
Especially at the forward position, right? Because we saw last month the absence of a true center forward with Josh Sargent not in camp. And even when he is in camp, Josh Sargent, there's just one of him. And so you need 2 or 3 or 4 strikers in a squad. And I think Jossie Zardes would probably be penciled in as maybe even the starter. I think if they played a meaningful game tomorrow that they had to win to, say, qualify for the World Cup or something like that. But filling out the rest of that and who is somebody that can, long-term grow into more, of an important role at that position, I think is a very important thing to figure out, because for as good as Christian Pulisic is and the rest of the strong midfield of Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie and everyone, you still got to find somebody to put the ball in the back of the net. And so based on what we've seen in MLS this year, Io Akinola obviously had a very good season. Daryl DK down in Orlando as well. Be very, very interested to see what he looks like in the red, white, and blue, and how he kind of adapts to Greg Berhalter's system. And that'll be the most important thing. And that's why I do like having this MLS specific camp, because you bring everybody in at the same time of year. They're in the same cycle of their season. They're in the same mindset that, it's the last thing before they get a little bit of vacation time off during the off season. And you really push over the finish line strong. So I would be very, very excited to see the forwards more than anywhere else on the field, because I think we've got just about everything else sorted for the first team, but it's about that spot up top still.
So do you think that Akinola and DK are really the guys that can stake their claim to be mainstays in this squad for the future? Do you think those two are really the guys that stand out here?
I think that's what this exercise is to find out, right? There's no way to know until you bring them in. They work with Berhalter, and then just learn his ways, and he learns a little bit more about them. So it's a long-term process, and thankfully the World Cup is still a little ways away, and qualifying's not quite so far away, but there's enough about the rest of the team, I think, to carry them through the early parts of qualifying. But they absolutely need to know by the start of 2022 what their 3 or 4 man rotation is up top.
Nick, in terms of, I'm thinking about here that it was so impressive from the European-based players, even though a lot of them are really young. Is this an interesting kind of, it's a battle, right, between the MLS-based squad and the European-based squad? And it's, if they don't impress against El Salvador on December the 9th, is it okay? We're going to go with the European-based players now. We love MLS. There's a lot of good young players coming through there, but these European-based players are clearly ahead of the curve and further along their development. Do you think there's an argument there to kind of say that might happen with the US?
Yes, I do think there's an argument there for sure. When I look at this roster and I look at some of the names on it, I can't help but be drawn into their next destination as much as their current destination. I think about, Brian Reynolds isn't there, but we saw reports with him of Juventus. Mark McKenzie's been linked to Celtic. Brendan Aronson's going to Red Bull Salzburg. And that's kind of where I'm led there. Mark McKenzie, really interesting to me as well as Walker Zimmerman. I think Zimmerman, the one thing that alarms me, Andy talked, the last time we talked about the USMNT, he made a great point that really triggered something with me, which is we know it's John Brooks, and we're not sure who's next to him if John Brooks is healthy. Zimmerman and Brooks are possibly the best pairing, and they haven't played together in how long? So I would love to see Zimmerman as the unadulterated leader out there. But again, how do you judge that? Judging on the MLS standards, part of that happens by dominating against El Salvador from the back. And they're a cagey team. I looked up some numbers. They were outshot by Peru 20-1. They were outshot by Japan 20-1, but both of those games finished 2-0, and one of them they won. So they're well drilled. They haven't played since January. You should win.
Yeah, and let's also keep in mind, and final point very quickly, is the biggest progression and the brightest signs from the European-based players last month was in the time from the first game to the second game. They had the benefit of a second game. This group will not. So I know we always come back to MLS versus Europe, and that's fine. It's American soccer. It's what we do. But let's try not to write all of them off if the first game, the only game, is not just an absolute dominating performance.
We know that fans are going to be doing that anyway, so we will try our best to stay very, open-minded about these young players that we're going to be very excited to see as the US men's national team host El Salvador on December the 9th, as we get one more chance to see the US in action in 2020. And I think we're all looking forward to that, right, to see how good these young prospects can be. Moving on to the Premier League, and Matchweek 11 is in full focus already, gents. You can find all the previews, team news, stream links, and how to watch these games up on Pro Soccer Talk on NBCSports.com. The big game is the game we have to start on when we're previewing this weekend. Tottenham against Arsenal, North London derby time. Spurs can go 11 points clear of Arsenal if they win. I'm just going to throw that out there. Just, take that, well, however way you want to take it. But I'm interested mostly to see how this tactical battle kind of evolves on the pitch, because Mourinho, we saw against Chelsea, we saw against Man City, he's quite happy to sit back, defend, and hit teams on the counter. And I think Arsenal also are very happy to do that under Mikel Arteta and sit back, defend deep. So are we going to see a boring 0-0, or are we going to see both teams perfecting that plan really well? And there's been a lot of draws between these sides, a lot of close, tight games. So yeah, I'm interested to see just how this develops. And I think the best thing that neutrals can hope for in this match on Sunday at Tottenham is for there to be an early goal and it to open things up. So Andy, I can see you nodding in appreciation. And what are you looking forward to in this game? I mean, who needs to win this game more early in the season? Because Tottenham are top, Arsenal are struggling. This is a big game for both teams.
Yeah, Arsenal need it far, 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 far worse than Spurs do. I mean, if Spurs don't win, then they might not be title contenders. They're still very much one of the 4 best teams in the Premier League this season. Inarguable point right there. Arsenal could find themselves, I mean, again, very, very much mid-table this season if they don't begin to pick up the pieces and put them together for this team. And I think the best way, at least for me, to look at this game and how Jose Mourinho is going to approach it is, I'll ask you guys a question. Do you look at Chelsea and facing them on the weekend and worry a little bit? Is there a little bit of fear if your team is having to play Chelsea on the weekend that you could get battered a little bit, that if you're not at your best, you will get beaten, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Is there the same sentiment with Arsenal, with them coming up on the weekend? There is not. And so there is no fear for Jose Mourinho going into this game. And I think that is going to be the determining factor in how he sets the team up. Against Chelsea, you know they're pretty good. You know they've got a ton of quality. And so he's set up in a certain way. I would think, you would hope at least, that he expects to go out on the field and dominate Arsenal this weekend. And so he sets the team up to operate as such, and that it's not super reactive and defensive the way it was against Chelsea this weekend. And I think that right there will do as much for kind of, evolving the mentality of the Spurs team and giving them the belief that in their biggest game of the season, or one of them at least, that they're going to go out there and they're going to be the aggressors. They're going to be the dominant team. And they're not going to sit on the back foot the way they did against City. It worked, of course. The way they did against Chelsea, it kind of worked. But that they're really going to go out there and they're just going to try to beat Arsenal from the first minute.
Nick, do you think the ponies of Tottenham, does this kind of all come down to, like Andy said, their expectation? Is this the next step in their development to go out there and say, we're going to take it to Arsenal and we are going to go for the win here? We don't care about grinding out a 1-0 result or a 0-0 draw. I mean, is that the next step for this Spurs team?
Almost every time you ask that question, I would say yes, except there's the Thursday Europa League consideration that concerns me a little bit. That's such a challenge. I can't believe how well Spurs navigated that in September. And there's part of me, plus the cup games, there's part of me expecting some sort of regression at some point, not as quality of a team, but just legs and how that can go. Then again, Arsenal, 10 goals in 10 games, 2 of the leakiest chance conceding teams in the league, Leeds and Leicester, have put up clean sheets against Arsenal. So I hope somebody can give Mikel Arteta a back rub this week, maybe a full massage, because he seems like he's about to spontaneously combust, and I think he needs to relax a little bit, but it's going to be difficult for him. He's played in this fixture. He knows just how fun Sunday's going to be.
Yeah, he's quite a somber soul, I think. Arteta would be the best way to sum him up. I mean, even when...
Dark as his hair.
Yeah, when they win, he's kind of, he's never too happy. And after, the most recent defeat to Wolves, he's already being asked about his future and saying, I knew the day that I took the job that I would be fired or I'd leave soon, or, and it's just, just relax. You're still, less than 12 months into the job. Things aren't going well. But for me, the big thing here is it's the battle but it's a showdown between Harry Kane and Aubameyang. Which one of those strikers, number one, gets the most chances? I'm going to hazard a guess and say that Kane will get more chances. And then which one of those strikers can put them away? And they're big game players, both of them, especially Aubameyang. He's been so quiet all season, hasn't had a lot of chances, but this is exactly the type of game he will pop up, just like he did in the FA Cup run to win it last season, get a couple of goals, and then they'll all be talking about him again.
Yeah.
Right, Andy?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And he is by nature, being a center forward, he's going to have streaks, good streaks and bad streaks, and obviously is in the middle of a very, very poor one at the moment. But I just, again, and this is something that I wrote during in the recap of Arsenal's loss to Wolves, that contract, and we talked about this, I think at the very first one of these that we did, that's a big contract for a 31-year-old, will be 34 by the end of it, who's never been a chance creator, who requires a ton of service to get his chances and his goals. And he's playing in a team that there's no service whatsoever. And so he is just kind of out there on the field. He's just roaming around. He's never been much, had much of a defensive work rate. And so he's not contributing a ton in other ways until he starts scoring goals. Arsenal are almost playing with 10, maybe 10 and a half players on the field at a time because they kind of have to carry him at times. And if he's not able to manufacture chances for himself, I don't know where they come from in the rest of this team. And you also mentioned Arteta, kind of the somber tone. He's already embraced the Diego Simeone black on black on black outfit. I mean, dark times for Arsenal for sure. And his team kind of plays like Simeone's Atletico Madrid as well, don't they?
They do, and Arsenal need a big win at Tottenham to turn that mood around and try and get back on track this Sunday. So you can watch that 11:30 Eastern time across NBC Sports. Nick, moving on, Liverpool-Wolves is a game I know you've got your eye on. That should be an absolute beauty of a game on paper. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how Wolves cope without Raul Jimenez. And Liverpool, we all know about Jurgen Klopp and his complaints about their injuries.
Yeah, I'm going to poke the bear, and you got to be careful with your finger because that bear has magnificent teeth. Jurgen Klopp, I don't know what's going on in this guy's head right now. I mean, he's a wonderful manager, a legend, a genius, and Liverpool still has looked for the most part pretty darn good. But Brighton performance aside, I'm curious as to whether he's having problems adapting to not having a target above him. This is the best his team has ever been. Going back to Borussia Dortmund, to Mainz, he has never been the front runner, and it almost feels like these mentality monsters have not had their mentality challenged, but what do we do now? I think the team has looked good, but some of these excuses, look, last weekend, let's be honest, I thought for as legendary as this guy is, I thought that interview was kind of embarrassing for him on a relative level, and bringing Chris Wilder into the criticism when the managers union, right? You're supposed to be supportive of your guys, and Klopp has always been the key to that. He would praise, he would talk about Steve Bruce, who we mentioned earlier, as being some sort of tactical wizard who always has his teams lined up. So I wonder about his mindset, and I really am concerned a little bit about where Liverpool's camp is right now against a Wolves team that can get you, and it's going to have a little precocious 18-year-old up top probably.
Definitely. Andy, Chelsea against Leeds is another game that should be an absolute belter. What are you looking forward to in that one?
Yeah, Nick, it's almost like Jurgen Klopp and other managers can be disingenuous at times and say things that they don't really mean, but for ulterior motives. Anyway, Leeds, they've been good away from home this year. 3 of their 4 wins on the season away from Elland Road. They've won 3 of their 5 away games now, and then they've kept a clean sheet, by the way, in all 3 of those wins. Now, the other 2, they've conceded a combined 8 goals to Liverpool and Crystal Palace. So it's going to be one of the 2 extremes, I think, at Chelsea at Stamford Bridge this weekend. But I really like just the work rate, the industry, and how they make it very difficult to play against. As a newly promoted team, if you can be difficult to play against, you're difficult to beat, and you will pick up results just by that fact alone. So I think every time they face even these big teams, I think they have a chance every time they take the field.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, fans are returned to the Premier League games this weekend. For the first time since March, they're going to have 2,000 fans at 5 different games across the weekend. So West Ham United against Manchester United is another game I'm looking forward to. Brighton against Southampton is sneaky good. 2 teams playing well down there on the South Coast. And Sheffield United, Leicester City. Let's see if the Blades can actually get a win. And Leicester, for how well they played early in the season, they have had some shocking defeats, as we saw against Fulham last time out. So head over to Pro Soccer Talk at NBCSports.com for the latest team news, stream links, and everything else you need ahead of this weekend. And gents, all that's left for me to say, thanks for joining me for Pro Soccer Talk, and enjoy the games wherever you're watching from.
Hi there, I'm Rebecca Lowe. Make sure you subscribe to watch highlights all season long, and always join us every weekend at 7 a.m. on NBCSN for Premier League mornings. Plus, Make sure you subscribe to Peacock Premium as well, where you can watch exclusively live 175 games and same-day on-demand replays of all 380 Premier League matches as well.